It's exactly 5:30. All right, all right, all right, all right. Let's get started. Let's get started. Sasko table there, quite silence, silence. Student command. It's now 5:30 exactly, so let's get this show on the road. We are launching a book of a very important historical figure. We're quite privileged, in fact, to host this event. And this is the book, in case you haven't seen it. It's a product of long, hard years of research, started almost 12 years ago. Some of us knew about it, the idea of it. We heard rumors. And at some point, when we were not seeing it coming, we were beginning to say rather, that Gumamlambo lo. You know Mamlambo is a creature that Xhosa speak about. Everyone vouches that they've seen this creature, but they can never point at it by EP where it is, right? It's this mysterious creature. So the book was beginning to resemble Umamlambo. So finally, here it is. We are here to celebrate and reflect on the book. It's one of two books I know, fully fledged books on Sobukwe. Part of the reason, and the significance of Sobukwe, Thami will tell you about a story. Well, the story is actually in the book. That when Steve, in the 70s, Steve met Sobukwe, and he then came back to tell his comrades that namhlanje ndidibene noThixo uqobo. I met God, right? And part of the reason, I guess, that we even have the university command here, the VC and the DVC, is to recognize the significance of the moment. My name is Mcebisi Ndletyana, professor of politics at this institution. My role is to facilitate the discussion really more than anything else. We have a program in front of us, and we are meant to be out of this place at 7 o'clock. We have a couple of speakers. Each has his and her role, so I will not encroach into anyone's role. And I think it would be proper that we get the proceedings underway. And to welcome you to this institution is our DVC for research, Professor Surab Sinha. Surab, please.
So I was just good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Mcebisi. Just before we started, I was just jokingly saying to him that, are we going to start on time? And he said something like, since a year and a half, we always start on time. I didn't know what he meant by that. I thought he was making a presidential remark. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of the text on Sobukwe. As you know, that we are going through a fascinating journey in terms of our research outputs, particularly when it comes to developing of biographies for African leaders. As you will know and remember, that the university often has in our aspiration our quest to be a Pan-African epicenter for critical engagement. And this is a slogan that we have kept for a number of years. A couple of years ago, the university started a module on African insights, which, as you know, has the acronym AI. And I know you're very fascinated about the acronym AI for other artificial reasons. And in fact, back to back with this event, we're also having an artificial intelligence aspect. But African Insights is a module that we made compulsory across the university. And part of this route was for us to study, reflect on various African leaders, their contribution, and also to the notion of Pan-Africanism. So, so that's been the context. Of course, my role is to welcome you. So I should, of course, welcome you to this. But this is not just, it's a series of events that we will have. And we are very honored to have our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, who is standing up. I was not finished yet with my welcome. But let me also welcome the other dignitaries. And of course, I'll bring you up just now. I would like to also recognize Thami Plaatjie. Thank you very much for honoring us with not just the text, but also with the association that we have started with you through the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study, which is led by Dr. Bongani Ngqulunga. Now, Bongani has been very fascinating. I actually can't see him because he's been able to, he has been, you see, if you want to have a good director, Dr. Bongani has been able to delegate all aspects of this evening's activities to the rest of us. So Bongani, thank you very much for that. I'd also like to recognize members of the Management Executive Committee, Dr. Nolita Vukuza, who is present. And I have not yet seen Ms. Ipusileng Kotskwane, but I think that she has just went out, but she's the lead for the KPP Review Publishing, which is the publisher for this particular text. The library has also been an important part in terms of it, so I'd like to welcome all of you who associate not only with the university, but also with the journey of individuals like Robert Sobukwe, but also to the value system that he has been able to bring to us. And one simply, I know that the Vice Chancellor will also do an intro, but if one simply thinks about, I think it was actually, I was looking at the October connection, and I think, Thami, it was October 1949 when he delivered his outgoing speech as president of the SRC at the University of Fort Hare. And I thought that, I don't know which date, but at least the month, that was almost 50 years ago from this day today. And so I think that, or from this month today, so I think it's quite an interesting journey that's happened. So with those words, let me welcome the Vice Chancellor, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. I don't think he needs any introduction anymore. You know him very well, so let me hand over to you.
Sanbonani, Dumelang, Awusheni, Molweni, Ndimadekwana. Thank you very much. I would like to acknowledge quite a number of people here. Thami, the person that is responsible for all of us to be here tonight, and also students. I don't see the SASCO students here.
They're not as curious as
I see PASMA, I see the EFF, Student Command. That is the governing party here at the University of Johannesburg. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of members of the senior executive team here at the University of Johannesburg, Dr. Nolita Vukuza. Please stand up so that the fighters can know who is responsible for amending our constitution of the SRC. And also, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Bongani, who is at JIAS. Thami is a fellow of JIAS. And Bongani is also a writer in his own right. He is the winner of the Ellen Patton Award. Thami, this is not very Pan-Africanist name, but certainly it's a very prestigious name. And he wrote a book called the man who founded the ANC. And he discovered that the man who founded the ANC is not a doctor after all. He just liked the title. So, as calls for decolonization of knowledge continue to reverberate through the halls of our teaching and learning institutions, one solution is to relegate in the hidden history of South African figures. One such treasure is Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe, also known as Professor, whose role in the liberation struggle is widely acknowledged. I am also reminded of the author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's stark warning in a TED talk some years ago about the danger of a single story. While tales from American and British books she read stirred her imagination and opened up a new world for her, Adichie says the unintended consequence was that she did not know that Africans could exist in literature. The absence of Africans in literature serves as a sober truth for both fiction and non-fiction. This then calls on universities to take concrete steps to ensure that Africans exist in the literature. Recently, the University of Johannesburg launched the first of at least 12 biographies of African leaders. The first book is on Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe. The book, Sobukwe, The Making of a Pan-Africanist Leader, is a story from the perspective of the Pan-Africanist Thami. I was reminded of a time when George Bush was invading Iraq. And Madiba says, yes, it is the correct move. And Thami came and said, don't we have old age home for retired political leaders? By the way, you can go to the newspaper and found the full script. Perhaps now that we are living in the era of the fourth industrial revolution, where machines through artificial intelligence are able to write their own stories, we shall have a biography of Sobukwe which would be written by an AI machine. It won't be biased. It won't have a political ideology. We, however, need, most importantly, to digitize our archive first before we start thinking about AI writing stories. Much of the information, certainly about our continent and about personalities in our continent, are not digitized. And if they are not digitized, they shall be lost. And we cannot afford to have that knowledge lost. Cornel West from Harvard University, in pursuit of a different story on Sobukwe, once asked Nelson Mandela about his views on Sobukwe. Mandela paused for 5 minutes and he said, that one. What Mandela was alluding to was that Sobukwe was a complicated man who requires serious study. It is through multiple stories that we can cross-validate facts and have a more accurate story. We are well versed in the stories of historical figures, the stories of Thomas Sankara, of Kwame Nkrumah, of Martin Luther King Jr. However, these biographies we consume do not often include, certainly, our own stories. What the UJ Biographies Project seeks to achieve is to create a platform for African stories to be told, because our tapestry is rich and there is a void where these stories should be narrated. This project is the first of such project, certainly in South Africa, and it is fully funded by the university. When the Africa Biography Project was announced last year, we set the Johannesburg Institute of Advanced Study an ambitious goal of 10 African biographies. By next year, we will be closing on 20 biographies. Some of the personalities that will be covered in these biographies include Moses Mabhida, Wangari Maathai, and John Knox Wokwe. So fighters, we do not normally write about people who are still alive. So it is premature to write about the CIC. But the history will be written in Plaatjie's biography on Robert Sobukwe demonstrates the necessity for these stories and the yearning to delve into our history. It was 59 years ago that Sobukwe resigned from his job as a lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand. Leading the Pan-Africanist movement, he was about to embark on a 5-day non-violent protest against the draconian pass laws. I must confess that I know this history by heart because I was once a member of AZAPO. Then I resigned, I became the member of the PAC. Then I resigned, then I became a member of the ANC. That was many, many years ago. The fighters will say, hey, this man is not politically reliable, you know. I was just a curious young man who wanted to find out a place, a political home for myself. His plan was more significant than just the 5 days. At the end of it, Sobukwe would hand himself in the Orlando police station as a powerful call to other black South Africans to fight back. He gathered a following along the 8-kilometer walk to the police station as groups of men from Pefeni, Dube, and Orlando West accompanied him. There he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for inciting Africans to demand the repeal of the pass laws. The power behind is palpable. It shook the National Party. They lashed out, and his time on Robben Island was isolated. If you go to Robben Island, you will see an isolated house that used to only house Robert Sobukwe. While he had books and newspapers to bide the time with, he was kept in solitary confinement and lived in separate area on the island where he was strictly prohibited from contact with other prisoners. However, his legacy demonstrates the power of thought. Sobukwe was so feared that the nationalist government enacted the Sobukwe Clause, which empowered the then Minister of Justice to extend his detention indefinitely. So entrenched had his views on liberation of Africans become that the clause was only applied to him and renewed every year for the entirety of his sentence. His imprisonment continued long after his release. So fearful was the apartheid government of his pool, they ensured he was never really a free man again. First, he was banished to Khalishiwe in Kimberley to remove him from his friends and family. They then insisted that the only work he could do was low-ranking jobs. The apartheid regime barred him from leaving the country to take up international job offers. After finally completing law and completing his articles and establishing his law firm, the government tried to stop him from entering the courts. When that failed, they ensured newspapers were not allowed to quote him when he argued in court. When he fell ill because of cancer, they stopped his attempts to get the medical treatment he needed, which ultimately led to his death in 1978. I am not going to talk about his funeral. Wongani is from Mahlabathini. Wongani, I'm quite worried about your safety, so I am not going to talk about the funeral. But it was a divisive funeral where there was skirmishes. You know what I'm talking about, Thami. We can talk without speaking, involving some of, the strongest leaders in our country. The apartheid government tried so desperately to maintain this hold on him, but it was too late to extinguish the fire that he had ignited. While Sobukwe's political views to mobilize Africans to liberate themselves and later inspire the Black consciousness movement are widely known, Thami has delved deeper into the inner thoughts, soul, principles, and the heart of the Sobukwe story. Thami is a politician in his own right. He used to be the Secretary General of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Tanzania in 2000, and he has devoted his life to understanding the psychology of Sobukwe. His biography relays the narrative of a man towering intellect with deeply held principles and the authority he continues to have years after his death. This biography is only volume 1, so it is the beginning of a project that aims to move away from the focus on the single story. Much more remains to be achieved in telling the African stories. In my inaugural address as the Vice Chancellor of this great university, which happens to be the biggest in Johannesburg last year, I called for stories about leaders who have played serious roles in our lives, such as Lillian Goyi, Gertrude Shope, Queen Zingambande, and others. Here we still have a gap. While we have phenomenal biographies coming out this year, the stories of female icons still need to be told. So, especially for the women in this room, consider this as a clarion call for you to become writers about women's stories in South African history. We need more female representation. Thank you very much, Ngiyabonga.
I'm told, VC, that you'll be presented with a book as a token of the publisher and Thami's appreciation for everything else. Please stand up and receive your gift. Well, your wife needs one, so yeah. Thami Zangapambe. All right. Okay, Mqin, enkosi. So uhlala lapho sibasahamba. VC, yeah, you can. Years ago, I was given the responsibility to lead a team to identify sites that were associated with our iconic figures. Amongst them was Sobukwe. And we went searching for these sites that would tell the story about Sobukwe. And it took me to two places primarily. First was in Grahamstown, our Grafrenet rather, in search of a house where Sobukwe had grown. And we got to this house. Nothing about this house was telling of the significance of the house. Firstly, the house was not preserved for memorialization or commemorated in one way or another. It was a funny-looking house, pink house, typical apartheid houses with a funny color, pink. And apparently the house was no longer owned by the family. And so we get to this house, we want to find out about the family, about Sobukwe and everyone else, but we never got to hear anything. So the trail was never really a trail. So we went to Kimberley, still looking for stories and people who would speak about Sobukwe. We got to Khalishewe, at Molapo Street where Sobukwe lived. And the house was occupied. And people, yes, knew that the house, Sobukwe, that's where Sobukwe was in house arrest. But there was nothing about this house that told the story about Sobukwe. So we then went to an office where Sobukwe had his office as a lawyer. And just opposite, the office is located next to a hall, Bantu, it's called, I think, in Khalishewe. And just opposite the office was a bottle store. We pedaled to locate the office because it was quite busy there. It's a hub of activity, people looking for alcohol. And there were, so there's music around, right? And we kept on asking, where's this place where Sobukwe had enough? The little building that served as Sobukwe's office. And someone knowledgeable enough we were lucky to find that person, was able to point us to a building that seemed hidden behind crates of beer bottles. So we walked towards this building and we looked around and actually realized that there is a building behind these crates of beer bottles in Wood. And so we're looking for evidence that this was the office Sobukwe, and we managed to see a plaque, little plaque, that testified that indeed Sobukwe used that building as an office. What I'm saying is that there has been, perhaps intentionally or unintentionally, an erasure of Sobukwe's memory. One of the important things about this book is that it is finally an answer to the silence. Because you see, when you seek to silence, you can't quite silence because silence also speaks. The silence is itself provoking thought. So in our asking, someone finally answered, and this is the answer.
Dumedise, Mangibingelele, Latek Dimensa Groot in all our languages. In Sesotho, when you greet, you say Dumelang. Now, Dumelang means agree. In simple English, Dumelang means agree. In isiZulu, when you greet, uthi sanibonani, meaning I see you. So I want you to agree that I see you. I want to thank the University of Johannesburg for this singular opportunity, rare as it may sound, to be accorded place and time to share with you some of the ideas that emanate from the great thoughts of a man called Robert Sobukwe. I am indeed humbled and honored to be amongst the brilliant minds of our country, to speak about the man who many others would have wanted us to forget. I am appreciative to the students who are here, and I look forward to a robust engagement. No holds barred, let's talk openly and argue around these issues. I'm also grateful to the publishers for having supported and assisted me throughout this journey. And friends are here, families are here, all comrades, Comrade Aido Lekota, a very senior journalist, is here. And thank you very much. Comrade Chaka and many others with whom I've traveled the journey. When we launched this book at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, I referred to a few anecdotes which I would want to share, inshallah. I resigned my work in 2007. I was a senior manager at the National Development Agency in Johannesburg, in charge of policy and strategy. A very lucrative position by any means and stretch of imagination. There was something that was pushing me to a particular direction. There was this yearning, there was a void. Those learned people call it the lacuna. There was a lacuna that needed to be filled. There was a voice that was in my mind. That was a voice calling. There's a popular piano song, say, "Are you coming?" Are you coming? Yes. Kokota, and if you knock at someone's house, they open and then you greet. Sanibonani, something like that. So there was a voice. There was a voice calling, and this voice was irrepressible. So I took it as a mission to abandon my work. Told my wife, this is the money that I've earned for the duration of my tenure at this place. I am going to look for a Sobukwe. I'm going to look for this man. I just couldn't take it. That this man, for all that he has done, he becomes a footnote, nondescript, marginalized in the margins of margins, in all forms and manners of expression, in memorabilia, in public space, in debates, in arguments, in any intellectual and public life. Sobukwe is missing. And there are people who are profiting from his absence. And what is it that they fear so much about the ideas of this man? So I decided one thing. In Africa, or as Africans, before you speak to certain spirits, you must go and confer with them. I took my car, I drove 990 kilometers to a place called Graf Reinet. And I looked for the grave of Robert Sobukwe. And I stood next to that grave for 1.5 hours. I had a conversation with Sobukwe. I spoke to Sobukwe that I have not met you. I could not have met you. By the time you died, I was 10 years old. I was young. I was in the Vaal where I grew up, 4-roomed house, one mother, one father, 12 sisters or 12 siblings. I couldn't have met you. My conditions did not allow me to have met you, notwithstanding the fact that I was young. So here I am. Reveal yourself to me. I don't know whether I answered, whether I said yes or no, but I left. I came back for the second time, and I came back for the third time. And for the third time, I realized that, no, it seems like there's been a sign. Julius Malema speaks about a signal. I thought there must have been a signal. Some signal came through, and the signal said to me, go ahead. I could feel it, because things were beginning to, and then I started talking to the veterans. Out of the 89 people that we've interviewed, 55 of them have passed away. That's a library on its own. 55 people have passed away. The beauty of any research we did was to sit them down, to put the tape, and to chronicle their stories. As Professor was saying when he spoke here, we need to archive some of our information. A great many of our people, black people are very loquacious. Charles Darwin speaks about evolution and the theory of evolution. He speaks about the Homo sapien, who are the wise men. He speaks about those who can speak, the Homo loquas, and he also speaks about those who can write, the Homo scriptus. It is high time that we gravitate from the ability to speak to the ability to write and to communicate things in writing, to preserve, even family history. You go to your own family at home, you ask about your great-grandfathers. Everything's oral. There's no text. I went to a particular school in Sharpeville to trace the lives of two young people who were inspired by Sobukwe, Nyakane Tsolo, who led the Sharpeville 60 massacre. No record. Go to the schools where you studied, no record. No record. Not even a paragraph that so-and-so was here and spent so many years or 3 months at this school. Black people do not keep records. And that is why gradually historians are going to find it difficult to chronicle our own stories because we don't leave documented record behind. I spoke to Sobukwe, I met with the family and engaged with many other people. Few things that I've discovered in the course of this journey. One, as Prof. Ngulunga Bongani discovered in his book, that Pixley Isa Kaseme was not a PhD holder. I discovered that Sobukwe was not Xhosa. Sobukwe was Sotho. Nelemo Sotho. Ke Mosotho, ke Motswening. Sobukwe's grandfather came from Lesotho in a place called Kuting. And his real surname was Rabokwe. And when he arrived at the Xhosa, with the Xhosa people, they adulterated the surname. And they called him Sobukwe. And they gave him a clear name, they call him Mfene. Because Mfene is Tweni. Mfene is Tweni. Not a gorilla, Mfene. In English, it's a baboon. A baboon, not a gorilla. It's a baboon. Now, one of the things that also comes up in the book is the importance of clan praises and clan names. And I delve deeper into that study. And I urge students to take up these issues and to proceed and to do follow-up research. I say in the book, any African leader, in the main, must be understood against the backdrop of his culture, heritage, especially clans. I make an example, for instance, about Mandela. Mandela's great-grandfather brought a reconciliation between two fighting brothers, siblings. And when he was given the throne, Mandela's great-grandfather, when he was given the throne, he was given a new name, a chiefly name, and that name was Madiba. And Madiba means reconciler. Madiba means peacemaker. So Mandela's great-grandfather was a peacemaker. And Nelson Mandela in 1994 became a peacemaker. So it runs in the family. That is why in their clan praises, the father was Dlomo, the creator of the clan. That is why in the clan praises, we spoke about Usopija, Ungolomsila, Uyemyem, Uvalabampenzele. Uvalabampenzele means when the brother defeated the exiled people, when he came to the village, women ululated and they lifted their skirts. In excitement. Something like that. So women lifted their skirts to celebrate the defeat of the other brother by the other brother. Hence, in the clans, in the praises of Madiba, kuno Valabampenzele. Yem means a scatterer. He scattered. It's like when you plant a seed, he threw them about. Leapfrogger. So we analyze the totems of African people. And we want to understand the traits and the makeup of a leader. We also look at a distinction between the Sotho clans and the Nguni clans, or totems. The Nguni totems are the founding fathers of their tribes, and the Sothos are animals. Bakwena, their totem is a crocodile. Bakubung is a rhinoceros, I think so. Then Batau is a lion. Batlaping is a fish. Bareta Tlapi, they venerate a fish, and they tell you about the exploits and the virtues of a fish, which is their totem. But we must also make a serious distinction that among the Barolong people, there's a very funny difference insofar as the veneration of this clan praises. There is a clan that does not praise human beings, nor does it praise animals, but it praises iron ore. So these are some of the Tswana people who are answerable for the platinum belt that you find in the Northwest. So as far back as that time, a certain group of the Botswana people saw value not in following the prescribed manner of veneration of clans, but they identified with an iron. But there's a section of the Botswana people who are known for being stingy. They don't eat during the day because there are many flies. They only eat at night. Because in their wisdom, at night, the prevalence of flies is very minimal. And there are no visitors who come at night. So they eat among themselves. And it is said when they eat, they don't look at each other in the eye. They gaze at each other only in the battlefield. So we understand Sobukwe against the backdrop of culture, orientation, the baboon, and they make up the Sobukwe who was a Musot. But one thing that also comes out in the book very prominently, Sobukwe was a rare person. Sobukwe was endowed with a brilliant mind, which made Sobukwe who he ended up as. You know, he was born like any other young person in the communities. He interacted with people like any other young person would. He played soccer, he was in debates. In soccer, they gave him a nickname, it was Full Stop. That was his soccer nickname. He was called Full Stop. But what distinguished Sobukwe more than anything was his mind. And his mind was nurtured by the following. One, his family kept a very huge collection of books. So at an very early age, Sobukwe had access to books. He read profoundly. I don't know how many of the students who are here today have read John Milton's volumes called Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Sobukwe finished those volumes when he was in Form 1. So at that early age, here is a man, one of his friends, Peter Rabrok, he says, Sobukwe possessive the fecundity of thought, the lucidity of expression, and the felicity of diction. Then he arrives at Hilltown. When he arrives at Hilltown, Hilltown normally has an annual English essay competition. People write essays, everybody in the village, they participate in that essay English competition. And Sobukwe is one of the applicants or entrants. When Sobukwe's English teacher realizes that Sobukwe's essay is one of the essays that are going to be considered in this competition, she withdrew her essay. And she told the staff, much as he's my student, I cannot compete with Sobukwe. His teacher at Hilltown with a master's from Sussex, she withdrew her essay. And when the results were announced, number 3 position went to Reverend Bailey of the Anglican Diocese in Grahamstown. Number 2 went to a lady who was a teacher with a master's degree at Hilltown. And number 1 essay competition went to a young man called Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, a provincial, that is Cape Town, East and West, both East and Western Cape Town. Essay English competition was won by a man called Robert Sobukwe. And the title of his essay was Masilo's Conversion. In summary, it is located during the war between the Xhosas and the British. The Xhosa armies defeated. All the way back, they discover a white lady with a child who had been displaced by the war. Masilo, the army general, has an option of killing the lady and the child since they have been defeated themselves by the British. But Masilo prevails over his army generals and army friends that we are not going to kill this lady, we are not going to kill the child. I am going to take the lady and the child and escort them to safety back in the fort to their own people. That was the story that Sobukwe wrote about. And this is a story that gave Sobukwe that kind of a prize. Sobukwe arrives at Fort Hare. Now, this is where young persons and students must begin to understand one of the greatest forms of knowledge creation is not to be bookish. A great many people have degrees, whether you call them masters, PhD, but very few of them are learned. And in some cases, they even have professors. And these professors, when you look deeply, they profess nothing. They are the professors called Professor Ornamentus. They're just ornaments. They wear all these titles because they regurgitate all the forms of knowledge that they've been given. In the book, I cite an example of a meeting I had at Fort Hare. Here we arrive at Fort Hare, hosted by Professor Swartz, who was then the Vice Chancellor. Professor Swartz hosts us, together with the PAC, a delegation of PAC veterans. One question was asked. Professor Swartz says to us, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fort Hare. This is a very prestigious institution. We were about to change the name of Fort Hare, and upon reconciliation or reconsideration, we realized there was no need to change the name Fort Hare because the name Fort Hare is a brand. One of the old men who was in my company stood up and he said, Professor, Vice Rector, you are arguing from a point of ignorance. Let me tell you the story. The name Hare is the name of a British mercenary. His name was Colonel Hare. Colonel Hare had succeeded in suppressing a revolt in India, and he was brought here in the Cape. The first thing that he did to fight against the armies of Sandile Kancika, he erected a fort. And this fort was called Fort Hare. So the name Fort Hare, it's a name that celebrates a colonialist, an imperialist, and a murderer. Because that Colonel Hare defeated Sandile Kancika. This university must be called the University of Sandile Kancika. Now, that does tell you that certain forms of knowledge are very organic. Certain forms of knowledge, which are the forms of knowledge that we must impart to our young people, are the forms of knowledge that are insurgent. Knowledge creation must not necessarily come to terms or coexist with the status quo. At all costs, in most cases, knowledge is rebellious by its very nature and character. And it is up to this challenge that young people must rise and embrace forms of knowledge that contradict the status quo. But having said that, you can only contradict the status quo if you have ideas far better than those of the status quo. You cannot just say, I remember there was a time when we were fighting in the 80s, someone said, away with Bantu education, okay? And then this guy was saying, it's a play, he wanted to write away with Gata education. He had just expelled the teacher from class and he looked around and he says, please teacher, don't go away. How do I spell the word Gata? So you are fighting apartheid education, but you can't even spell simple words. So for us to provide the new answers to the crises that we face in our country, it is young persons who must rise far above the limits that people are giving them. Sobukwe demonstrates in the book that he rose shoulder far above Verwoerd, far above Malan, far above the regime and all of his bestial, oppressive. He rose far higher, and they could not respond. Intellectually, he was impeccable. In terms of character, they said he was sea green, incorruptible. In terms of courage, here is the bravery of a lion. In terms of foresight, he was a prophet. So who could stand against such a person? Who could stand such a... That is why Verwoerd said Sobukwe was sentenced to 3 years. When he was supposed to be released, for the first time in history, a human being was sentenced to parliament by an act of parliament. Parliament. If you go to Cape Town, you know, there's something called Hansard records. Very impeccable. Parliament has a very, you know, impeccable method of keeping records. Those records, they tell you blow by blow. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, even if a criminal who has murdered people, when he's due to be released, he's let go. A mass murderer. But this one, who had finished his lawful, he wrote a letter to his wife to say, I'm coming home. I look forward to seeing my children. Please cook me that type of meal. I've not eaten it in a long time. And the wife organizes a welcome party. She's a nursing sister at Mofolo Clinic. She looks forward to the husband coming. And the parliament of the Boers convened. And they said, not this one. The only lone voice was Helen Suzman of the Progressive Federal Party. She stood up, a gallant white lady that I interviewed extensively for the next volume. She stood up, for the 6 years, because this thing came to before Parliament every year. Every year. Helen Suzman stood up. And the whole cabinet of the Boers, they voted to take Robert Sobukwe back to Robben Island after he had finished his lawfuls. And to make it worse, in Robben Island, he is not kept with other prisoners. When Mandela's, when the Mutuping of the PAC, when everybody else were in common cells, sharing cells, having conference, talking together, Sobukwe is isolated and is kept alone. That is why at some point he lost his speech. He could not talk. He had no one to talk to. He was punished 10 times the amount of punishment that is meted to a mass killer and a mass murderer. And we ask why? Why? You ask, where's Zenton? What has it done to elicit such anger and to bring the might of the system on his shoulder? What has it done? It is a sheer weight of character. It is a sheer weight of ideas, because he foresaw a United States of Africa. He said, one day we are going to enter the golden gates of the United States of Africa. It will stretch from Cape to Cairo, from Morocco to Madagascar. A unitary state, one common parliament, one common currency, one common foreign affairs policy. Those ideas predated his times. But more than anything, it was the humility of his character. He was jocular, he was humble, he was loving, he was caring. So the book, colleagues, brothers and sisters, is intended to start this debate, to invite you to explore the new vistas of knowledge. And as Prof has said, or the MC has said, there's not just one story. There are many stories. There are other many stories. There's not just one great leader, or iconic leader, or cult leader. There are many other great leaders. Dare I say, there are many other greater and greater and greater leaders. This is volume 1 of 4 volumes. When the volumes are finalized, we are going to call them Robert Sobukwe Encyclopedia. We will call them Robert Sobukwe Encyclopedia. It will be the first time we have an encyclopedia of an African leader. We talk about everything. We talk about Sobukwe's love affairs. He was a young man like anybody else. And I remember there were people who were offended. Why are you talking about Sobukwe's girlfriends? I said he was young. He was young, anajola. I mean, bekanethekile, bekarekte. No, some people, because they see him as a saint, he's like a godly person. No, he was fallible. He was a human being. He was charmed, and he got charmed. He was tall, handsome, with a baritone voice. I mean, few girls could resist that, to put. So, without much further ado, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I look forward to an engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thami. I'm sure our audience has a lot of questions. Are we all in the same meeting? Are we all in the same meeting? Are we still together? All right. People cleverer than me, decades ago or even centuries ago, realized that identity is what you know. You can only define yourself based on what you know about yourself. And part of the reason why colonialism, when it entrenched itself in Africa, the first point of attack was identity, starting with the names of people. That is why Thami is called Plaatjie today. I'm sure his ancestor was called something else. And if you look at the colonial records, the first name to be registered there is Plaatjie, but those who came before Plaatjie are not registered. So everything that became documented was that which was English. The names, the curriculum that was read at school, place names, the streets that we inhabited, our towns, King Williamstown, Grahamstown, and everything. Because part of a colonial project, the success of a colonial project depended on redefining your identity, knowledge of yourself in a way that would lead to you denigrating yourself, to feel that you are incapable of anything else. You have not achieved anything else prior to the arrival of settlers. In that way, you would become dependent on white folks. Right? So identity is central, or epistemology is central in people's identity, what they know of themselves. So this project is quite critical in an ongoing process of defining who we are. That is what we mean by decoloniality, extending the frontiers of knowledge. And that really illuminates, Thami, the importance of this project, which, by the way, has been an ongoing project in the anti-colonial struggle. That had started in the 1880s with folks like Edward Blade and Alexander Cramer, who were dealing with the question of slavery, folks that had been freed from slavery. Their main preoccupation at the time was, how do you rebuild the identity of these people? Trigger a process for them to regain their self-respect. And they identified that the key thing in that process of regaining dignity was epistemology, knowledge of self. From the 1880s onward, that has been the ongoing project of the anti-colonial struggle, mainly by nationalist African intellectuals. So your project is part of an ongoing and very important exercise to add to the knowledge that we have about ourselves. We do have a speaker, a respondent, who's a colleague of mine, Kwanti Wekonjo. Kwanti, by the way, did his PhD on the PAC. And he was an activist of the PAC also at some point. PAC meetings, this is a semi-gathering of Upoko. You might have experienced that PAC gatherings don't always end well. But this one will not follow that tradition. Kwandi, please, uza ngaphambili fakho.
Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Executive Director in the Office of the Vice Chancellor, our guests, representatives of the KMM Review Publishing House, visitors at the university, ladies and gentlemen, students. I'm probably not the best person, Prof, to respond to Thami's work. Thami's work titled Sobukwe, The Making of a Pan-Africanist Leader. It's because I'm too close to the subject. I do research, as some of you may know, on Pan-Africanism, on political leadership, and Black consciousness. Of course, lately I've focused a lot on global political economy. I've written and published a book and several journal articles on Pan-Africanism. And I gave the 6th Sobukwe Memorial Lecture at Fort Hare in 2011. I also interviewed almost all the people mentioned in Thami's book. Like he did, I visited Sobukwe family in Half Reinet and also went to the grave of Robert Sobukwe. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we are too close to the subject, your response tends not to question underlying assumptions. And when it does, it tends to come across as gatekeeping. In academia, we have gatekeepers. People who don't want new voices, new scholars coming into a particular field. They close the gates. So I wish in my response, I don't move towards any of the two extremes. Perhaps the second challenge, ladies and gentlemen, is that I have known the author for a long time. What I like about Thami is that he has done what he said and has said what he has done. Get it? He has done what he said and has said what he has done. So matching promise with action is very important, Thami, as the advisor to the minister. Matching promise with action is very important. The point I'm making, ladies and gentlemen, is that perhaps I should have not agreed, Dr. Ngulunga, to be a respondent. But I did, and I'm doing it in just a few points. The first point, biased as it may sound, is from me as a person who was also involved in the liberation struggle. And I never lie and say I was a member of the ANC. I was never a member of the ANC and shall never be a member of the ANC. During the liberation struggle, I came from the ranks of the Pan-Africanist Congress. And at university, I got closer and worked with the Black consciousness movement. So I'm not hiding this background about myself. And I never hide it anywhere I go. I'm very frank and open about it because I'm not ashamed of it. I wish to say this, ladies and gentlemen, many of us wept, some bitterly, when Sobukwe died and at his funeral in 1978. His funeral occurred just after the funeral of Steve Biko in Ginsberg. Thami's book wipes our tears, and it confirms the justice of the cause of the entire liberation struggle. Thami's book confirms that truth never gets buried because it rises again. The book provides a very clear picture of who Sobukwe was, where he came from, the influences in his life, and his journey to prominence in South Africa, Africa, and the world. There is an interview cited in the book, cited in Thami's book. It's in chapter 18, page 226. You see, I was given the book on Thursday, but I read and finished the book. So if you want to be an academic, you must know that you read. Can I quote this portion in the book, page 222, chapter 18? This is where you get to understand who Sobukwe was. He is described, I think it was an interview with one of the APLA commanders. And what he says is that, in contrast to Libalo's, Sobukwe's personality was defined by his sincerity to himself. He was very sincere in that which he believed in. He was not just pleasing the people for the sake of using them. He was true to himself and very sincere to his cause. He would never ask people to do things that he himself could not do. Close the quote. I think that says a lot about Sobukwe. The issue of sincerity. It's very rare to find amongst politicians. Of course, I must underline, ladies and gentlemen, that biographers need to be careful not to portray people they write about as saints. Thami has mentioned that already. Sobukwe was not a saint, and he never even pretended to be one. At the same time, biographers need to be careful so as not to create negative stories, not create negative stories about persons they write about, just for the sake of trying to appear critical and balanced. In other words, when writing biographies, the rigor of analysis of both documentary and oral sources is very important. The rigor of analysis of both documentary and oral sources is very important. The way you deal with your evidence, Thami, is very crucial for the integrity of your story. It's important to interrogate your sources. It's important to stay on your research subject up to the point when your book is published. You stay on your research subject up to the point when your book is published. I'll give you an example of Bongani Ngulunga's biography on Seme. It was published in 2017. But if you go through his notes and his bibliography, you'll find that Bongani was still at work in terms of research and staying on top of documentary sources in 2015. The book was appearing in 2017. Colin Bundy's book, he wrote a biography on Govan Mbeki. It was published in 2012. In 2012, just before publication, Colin Bundy was still on top of everything written on Govan Mbeki. The book written by Chabani Manganyi, The Beauty of the Line, a biography of Dumile Feni, which I would really plead that you get hold of that book. The Beauty of the Line, written by Chabani Manganyi on Dumile Feni. He also demonstrates the same rigor and staying on top of information related to the subject of your research up to the point where the publication is channeled out. You see, these guys were up to date with almost everything written on the subject up to the point when the publication is out. Thami, I'm going to get to a few technical points because you are associated with an academic institution. You are an intellectual. And I know very well that academics are going to take you on, not publicly, but in journal articles. When they write review articles of this book, I'm giving you hints so that you are able to respond to your reviewers. Besides that, Thami, as you know, no book is ever perfect. The first one, a technical area, I call it the cross-corroboration of sources when covering debatable themes. When covering debatable themes, you make sure you cross-corroborate your sources, you provide more evidence, you protect your debate, your story as much as you can. Where I found debatable areas in your book is from chapter 16, 17, and 18. The other chapters, well, one could digress with you as the writer, but I find a very solid story from the beginning up to. But when you get to chapter 16, 17, 18, you know those chapters, they cover a debatable era in South African politics. The split which occurred in the ANC, the ideological debates which took place during this period. In other words, Thami, there are many voices on these issues. Yours is an additional voice, a very important voice, but you must know that people are going to contest you, people are going to raise issues, people are going to criticize, and that happens with every author. The most experienced professors, they will tell you that the reviewers take them to task on this and that issue. For instance, you argue that the Africanists were politically, I'm paraphrasing, I think it's in chapter 17, where you say Africanists were politically naive and reactionary. This is when they failed to show solidarity with the 1956 treason trialists. They turned their back on the treason trialists. they wanted to capture the ANC Transvaal region. Yeah. I think this is from pages 206, from page 206 to page 210. I'm actually saying, Thami, this is debatable, seriously debatable. Other scholars would actually say, look, you must provide us with more evidence to argue this point. But you've made the point and you've argued it very well, you see. Second point, which could be raised by reviewers when they write reviews on your book, it's about your sources. Very good sources, very good source, a good bibliography which you've prepared. But your sources are a bit dated. Both your literature and even the very few journals that you have used, that's what academics are gonna say, yeah? And the very few journals, they go up to about 2009, with the exception of a book by Zakes Mda, which was published in 2011. You see. Otherwise, there's a lot of material which was generated from 2009 up to the time of publication of the book, which academics will say you've not read and touched on it. But on the whole, nothing would actually change your story, even if you were to get that material. Your story is very solid, your story is very clear, but like any other story you find in social science research, it will be challenged, it will be argued. Yes. Lastly, your chapter 18, that's my last point. Your chapter 18, formation of the PAC. My view, Thami, is that this chapter is actually not about the formation of the PAC. That's my view. The chapter is not about the formation of the PAC. The chapter is about perspectives people hold about Sobukwe. The chapter is about Nelson Mandela's perceptions of the PAC, of Sobukwe. So I don't see you getting into the details of how the PAC as an organization is structured, leadership articulation to branch level. I don't get those points, you see. And also, at the beginning of this chapter, I would have loved to hear you, Thami, talk about the fourth competitor for presidency in the PAC. Because in your chapter, you talk about Sobukwe, Libalo, and Mazunya, who were competitors for presidents of the PAC. But there is one important gentleman you've not mentioned, Dr. Peter Ntsele. Peter Ntsele wanted to be the president of the PAC, but he was not elected. Yeah? That's why he formed his own, it was called the Pan-Africanist Freedom Movement in 1960. Yeah? But of course, I'm told that he used to drink too much, so he died. And the party also collapsed, you see? Yeah. In other words, Thami, this is a great start. This is a great start. But I wish you can zoom into technical issues. Because if you are attached to an academic institution, hey, you might end up with an egg on your face. They even take your book for plagiarism check. That's what academics do. And thereafter, they throw stones at you. So you are attached to an academic institution. So you'll need to be very, very rigorous and uncompromising in your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kondlo. We did exactly as we had expected, to be critical and reflect broadly in a way that expands our understanding as well of the text and what is required of such text. We'll open up for Q&A. We still have a little bit of time. I don't actually know what time it is, but we are meant to be at by 7 o'clock, but I think we're doing well. What time is it now? It's still good? Okay. Well, the book ends with the formation of the PAC. I have quite a number of questions relating to the process towards the formation of the ANC Sobukwe, but most importantly, after the formation of the PAC. I have two questions just by way of initiating the Q&A. The one question is that you obviously choose a biographical subject that you are fond of. You never choose to write about someone you dislike. So inevitably, there's an element which you touched on, Thami, of subjectivity. And you touched on girlfriends. But that's not good enough. But I'm sure there are other controversial things, I think, especially coming with your background. You know, you're a politician, perhaps a party hack, to use the less glamorous term. And the PAC, I mean, Sobukwe is an iconic figure in the PAC historiography. And of course, legitimately, there's a need to restore his place in our history. But because of the veneration that we have for the man, the risk that we might exaggerate his role. I wonder, just wondering aloud, Thami, I'm not saying anything, if perhaps you think that there are risks of you doing that in the book, and if at all you came across compromising pieces of information that you felt perhaps don't quite belong here. I mean, Mulunga, you know, uncovered all sorts of ghastly things about Useme, and we'd always thought that Seme was a god, right? The man who founded the ANC. Turns out that Seme faked his credentials, right? Faked his credentials. Watyolelwa notyolelwa. He was divorced, the wife cheated on him. So it's like this came out as an ordinary man, right? And I remember Ngulunga, when he was writing this book, was like, yo. Angeke ukhole ukuthi ngifumana la. Ngithini? Uthe Useme, hey, how Useme. Right? All he could say was how Useme. And of course, he was working as a spokesperson for JZ at the time. So he thought, hey, what is JZ going to say when I tell him about Useme? I'm asking the same question. Were there any compromising stuff that came out you thought, hey, maybe I shouldn't include this? That's the one question. Then the second point kind of transcends to the post-1960 period, which is somewhat similar to the hero worship. What I get about all PAC people, including Ukwand, is the hero worshipping of Sobukwe. And I wonder, that partly explains the catastrophic history or the fate that befell EPAC after 1960, because after 1960, it never survived. It's like after Sobukwe, there was no one qualified enough to lead the PAC. It's like Sobukwe is the real God. Without Sobukwe, we can't have any other leader. So this hero worshipping of Sobukwe never allowed for the possibility to imagine someone equally capable to lead Sobukwe. And so I'm trying to understand this veneration, right? It's legitimate, but it becomes a little bit excessive, especially when you link it to the collapse of the PAC, that no one really, after Sobukwe, was ever able to lead the PAC. So those are the two questions for me that I would want to touch on. But I'm sure the audience has more questions, for us. All right. There's one question there. Okay, we'll start this side and spread across. So we'll start with these 4 questions this side. There's one question here. second question, third question, and fourth question, in that order, please. And in your Thami, you still have to answer Kwandi, ne? So keep in mind what Kwandi has said. So when you start answering these 4 questions, we can also touch on what Kwandi said. The 4 questions there, please. Be brief, be brief. You're not presenting your own talk. Straight to the point. Yeah, go ahead. Ustaze, please. Your name, please.
Ndingu Siyabulela. Quick question. Given the colonial influence and the influence of colonial institutions in the production of African leaders, and I will say that you can't write a story about Sam and not mention Adams College and the ministers that made him who he was. You can't write a story about Sobukwe and not mention Hilltown, the Methodist Church, and also and those colonial institutions. Now, and given that influence on that kind of generation of black leadership, of what value is it to canonize the story of an African elite in the midst of a different African experience of history? In a context where the bulk majority of black people at the time that most prominent African leaders lived were never educated, to canonize these Western educated black leaders, of what value is that in the process of creating an African epistemology?
Canonizing amaqobhoka. The second question.
Good evening, my name is Sandy Lentuli. My question relates to something that you spoke about, Professor Ngechana, which is that, the PAC started and then it didn't really go so well in the beginning. Like, it really collapsed very quickly. So then my curiosity is that would you maybe say, Thami, that although he was a good leader, such as we saw with, the march in Orlando East, would you maybe say that he was just terrible at grooming or mentoring people then? To actually maybe sort of show that why the party didn't actually do so well once he had actually left the party. So maybe could we say that he was not that good at mentoring or grooming people? What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
All right, thanks. Let's remember that this book is about the PAC up until 1960. So, I mean, PAC was about a year or two or so before it got banned, wasn't it? So, yeah. So the post-1960 history is the subject of the following volume. So we don't want Thami to speak so much about post-1960. He can, obviously, but not too much, right? So let's ask about the subject of this book, if we can help it. Number 3. No. I think he understood it. Mine also touched on that partly. I mean, I was taking liberties by virtue of being MC, but you shouldn't take the same privilege. Number 3.
Okay, thank you. Christopher Sicelo Kamaye. Thami, my question will be on reconciliation. I think Prof. Chilidze Marwala said that you've delved into the men's thoughts, into the men's principles, into the men's life. So I want to know and obviously you also say that he was not Sotho, he was not Xhosa, he was Sotho. So I think that presents a difference in his life, something which had to be reconciled at some point in time with him seeing himself as a Pan-Africanist or an Africanist. But also he was such an intelligent man, who could have pursued a career within the academia, but he also had this conundrum of having to lead his people towards, a better future. How do you think he was able to reconcile these differences in his life? And looking at the present South Africa, where there's, these debates around land having not returned, to the people, the issue of reconciliation in 1994, is it genuine or it's not? How do you think Sobukwe, as the prophet, would have viewed, the subject of reconciliation, and what approach would he have taken in terms of, achieving reconciliation in South Africa. Thank you.
All right, number 4.
Thank you very much. I am Reverend Dumisani Metula.
Ewe Mfundisi.
Amen. Kamalenko Salbong. My question, Mafrika Tamiga Plaatjie, Professor Nkondlo, it's informed by the Bible. And I'm reading the Bible from a decolonial, decolonized, Africanized with the aim of liberating the biblical text. Thus, I'm not using it from its colonialist, capitalist interpretation, but from its discourse of liberation. I'm a theologian, I'm a Bible scholar.
Okay.
And thus, I want to locate Sobukwe from his Christian orientation. I want to locate Sobukwe in the brilliant writing of Professor Nkondlo when he speaks about his spirituality. Mafrika Thami, in his opening remarks, just briefly, Professor Maralwa, ute uboni plasma, isas kagaiboni, uboni EFF. Let's not be emotional. This is a university. And we are to deal with
No. If you don't think we can respect others here, I think you should leave. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
You will get your time to ask questions.
Now, in passing, raising this, it is to say, more fundamentally, how a young intellectuals, university student, are to appropriate Sobukwe moving forward. Whether from Pan-Africanism, whether from ANC, but how do we appropriate Sobukwe? I like that discussion. But now,
Straight to the point, Mfundisi ungalibali. Straight to the point.
straight to the point is, Mafrika Thami, why the biography of Sobukwe? Why not the politics of Sobukwe? I'm not interested where did Sobukwe grow up, where did he sleep. I'm interested in his ideology, his ideas. Why always when we talk Africans, we talk biography, not ideology? Thank you.
All right. Let's take the four questions, Thami. Then we'll move on. Kwandi, of course, will also raised a few interesting things that requires responding.
Well, thank you very much. Let me answer the last question. Why biography? Why not ideas? If you had listened, I said this is the first volume of 4 volumes. So the last volume will be the interpretation of the political thoughts of Robert Sobukwe. But the presupposition is that you can only do that once you have laid the basis for people to understand who he was. You cannot talk about the person's ideas in isolation to the milieu, political and otherwise, that contributed to the makeup of his ideas. Those ideas do not fall from the sky. They are generated by an organic experience that an individual faces. How he grew up, who he mentored, who mentored him, who he interacted with, where he schooled, the influence of the missionaries, etc. All of those things, in the long run, are answerable for the making of his ideas. I hope I have answered the question. So the ideas and the thoughts of Sobukwe are coming in the last volume, after we shall have laid the foundation by way of a master narrative of the compendium of his life. There was a question that the MC asked, Professor Mcebisi, about Sobukwe the Saint. If you read the book, you cannot but be inspired by the fact that this was a unique person. By any stretch of imagination, he stood head and shoulders above other people. He was different, extremely different. Most of the people that are interviewed, some of them will literally cry. I recall an incident where we were with Zephania Mutupeng at his house in Orlando West. It was myself, Eugene Mutati, Wanda Masombuka, the late, and Jojo Lawrence Nandela, together with Comrade Khoisan X. We asked Zephania Mutupeng to give us a sense of who Sobukwe was. He paused, he shed a tear, and he said, had that man lived, we would not have been where we are today. Had that man lived, we would not have been where we are today. And just he kept quiet. He could not even proceed to narrate. So Sobukwe had this infectious impact or effect on most people that he came across. We could not part. I interviewed Ojuku, one of the leaders of Operation Vilaperi. I went to find him at his house in Groblersdal. I found him seated under a tree and opened to him that this is what I wanted to do. Before we could speak, he shed a tear. He said, I am who I am today because of that man. I would follow that man to hell and back. Even if there was fire, I would follow this man and I'll go into those flames, into those dungeons. I interviewed Babu Takama, Ngabisi. Takama says to me, I've never been to school. I don't know how a chalk looks like. I've never held it in my hand. It's vapors. I've never felt the smell of a chalk writing on a chalkboard. I've never been to school. I did not know English. I come from a poorest village in the Eastern Cape where a sticks of match, could only be bought by a teacher. If we wanted to lit fire, we had to go to the teacher's house to lit a cloth and to take it home to make fire. That's how poor we were. And then I met a man called Robert Sobukwe on the 14th of February, 1960, in Langa. He talked. When he finished, we asked him, what must we do? Because we're prepared to follow you and to follow whatever you are saying. So it is that saint-like impact that A. Sobukwe had on people. People of Sharpeville have not met Sobukwe. 250 people went to the Sharpeville Hall, so Sharpeville police station, and they were told to go back because they didn't have a pass. Remember, colleagues, during those days, if you don't have a pass, when you see a white man without a pass, you run away because you are summarily arrested. You are given lashes, you are given 3 months in detention because you don't have a pass. So a black person feared not to have a pass because the pass was the identity that identified your character and your personality. But Sobukwe said to the people of this country who were afraid of the Boers, who were scared, he said, for the first time, you must leave your passes at home and you must go to the police station and ask the police to arrest you. Wow. These were the most fearful people, oppressed, brutalized, dehumanized. They left their passes at home. 250 of them went to Sharpeville. They asked the police to be arrested. The police have never seen this. Victims, people who have broken the law, are now saying they must be arrested. And the police said, no, come back after 2 hours. People went back. When they came back, there were 2,000 and odd numbers. And the boys couldn't believe it. In Orlando, in Everton, in Langa, the biggest march going to the Houses of Parliament for the first time, 30,000 people led by Khosan. 30,000 people responding to what Robert Sobukwe told them to do. He was here in Johannesburg. So he was something else. No wonder people followed him the way they did. No wonder he had to be killed the way he was killed. No wonder he had to be silenced because even today, colleagues, Sobukwe died 28 February, I think 78. He had been interviewed, he had been blah, blah. There have been talks, discussions with him, but today, we don't even know where his voice is. There's no recording. All the recordings of even the voice of Sobukwe have been erased. I searched in vain to date. You find Mandela's interview 1956, Rivonia trial. I fought against black oppressions, white domination, blah, blah, blah. But a Sobukwe who died in 1978, We don't have his voice. We don't. Why? Because imagine if we can have his voice, what would that do? Which is trying to ask me, what would that do? Give us Sobukwe's voice tomorrow and you'll see what will happen. I'm sorry I'm being whatever. Sabulela asked the question about canonizing and what value is canonizing the African elite having on the current political trajectory.